Tu saw me.
E eu ainda tô. Deixa eu ver.
Yo pienso que está bien. Yo pienso que está
Será?
bien, ¿no? ¿Está bien? ¿Está bien? Ah, él va a traer la foto. Ok, bueno, la podemos ver. Que la traiga para verla.
Ah? Quer dizer, tu viu, né? Eu tenho um já. Agora tem três, tá?
Friends, we're going to begin now.
Yeah, she's not going to take the podium.
Good morning. Welcome to the plenary session on Solutions for a Healthy Planet, Responsible, Inclusive, Transformative Governance. And let me introduce myself. My name is Peter Seligman, and I've been involved in this movement for most of my life, having started a group called Conservation International many years ago, and then launching another organization called Neotero about 5 years ago. As we get started, we have a wonderful panel, and I will introduce all the panelists as we proceed. And we have a very important speaker who will share her perspectives with all of you shortly. But I want to make a few comments as we get started. First, I think it's really important again to once again acknowledge the passing of two dear personal friends of mine. Two great human beings, Mohammed El-Ashri, who was the first Secretary General of the GEF, and then another dear friend, Gustavo Fonseca, who worked with me at Conservation International for decades, and then joined the GEF as a key leader. I was with both Mohammed and Gustavo in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 at the birth of the GEF and at the birth of the UN Climate Convention. It was an extraordinary gathering in 1992. There were so many young people, so many indigenous peoples, so many NGOs, so many traditional peoples who were there to really voice a fear and a worry that the global environment was deteriorating at a rate that was a threat to all humanity. What was interesting about this gathering is that we were actually physically separated from the decision makers, from the governments. There were walls, there were barriers. We were not allowed to enter. We were marginalized and excluded. And that's a really important part of the challenge that we have been facing over the last 30 years. And that's part of what we want to talk about today. How do we shift so that all of these conversations about environment and about social justice and about rights are actually inclusive, that the right people are at the table and they are representing their own voices. Clearly, there has been a great deal of progress. We know that. We're all here. Every nation has embraced, signed agreements. So there has been an elevation of engagement, and all of you and all the journeys you've taken really represent that. But also clearly, the direction and the tide is going in the wrong direction. And whether we look at what happened in Lahaina, whether we look at the droughts or the floods or the fires that we are experiencing here in Canada, in British Columbia, in the Northwest Territories, we have an urgency that has to be addressed, and it is not being effectively addressed right now. There has been progress, of course. At the end of last year, there was the approval of the Global Biodiversity Framework in Montreal. That was a big deal. It has great ambitions. Now all we have to do is ensure that nation states embrace and deliver on that. And that's a concern that we all have. How do we design and ensure that the voices of traditional peoples, marginalized communities, indigenous peoples are actually heard and represented in all of these conversations? We also know that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and that's what we'll hear as we discuss this amongst this wonderful panel. There are different perspectives, different journeys, different ideas that have to be heard. And of course, we need to be thinking about how do the multilaterals, how does the GEF change so that it's more effective in actually uplifting and encouraging and stimulating the engagement of all who need to be around that table. If you look at this planet Earth, clearly the majority of the people on this planet are desperately poor, are marginalized, and their principal concern is how do I feed my family? We need to be able to address that issue at the same time that we address the global environmental issues that are a threat to everybody. 5% of the people on this earth are either traditional peoples or indigenous peoples. They control about 1/3 of the territory of the planet that's healthy, half of the forests, and it's their value systems, their relationship with place and nature that actually has allowed those places to continue. How do we actually continue to support and uplift their efforts? And then, of course, we need some economic solutions because economies determine policy and politicians' behavior. And so how do we transform our economic systems so that they are effective in valuing nature in the right way? So clearly what we need to talk about are shifts in our behavior, in our innovations, in our inclusiveness. And that's really the purpose of this particular panel and discussion. I know that that's why all of you are here. Before I do an introduction into our exceptional panel, I would like to start by introducing you to the Minister of Indigenous Peoples of the great nation of Brazil, Sônia Guajajara, who is the first indigenous woman to be a minister in Brazil, and she is the minister of the first Ministry of Indigenous Peoples. She is a warrior. She has fought this battle for decades and has had an extraordinary impact on Brazil, and she is here to share with us some of the lessons that she has learned, some of her observations, not just about Brazil, but about governance systems and about the way we as a group of people have to be inspired to change what we do. And so it is an honor to introduce the Minister of Indigenous Peoples from Brazil, Sonia Guajajara, to launch this discussion on how to shift governance.
Bom dia a todas e todos. Sou Sônia Guajajara, ministra dos Povos Indígenas do Brasil. E é um prazer estar aqui presente como representante do Brasil nesta mesa sobre os desafios de uma governança transformadora, inclusiva e responsável para um planeta sustentável. Este é um debate muito caro para nós do governo brasileiro e também para nós, povos indígenas. Este é um momento após séculos de resistência no Brasil, onde as demandas dos povos indígenas se encontram com as prioridades do governo. E esta experiência importa muito para este espaço e abordarei um pouco mais à frente. Mas antes de seguir abordando os aspectos da governança, venho reforçar algo que já deve ter sido dito nestes dias, mas é preciso reforçar. Os desafios das mudanças climáticas são cada vez mais urgentes. Infelizmente, estes últimos meses se enumeraram os anúncios da Mãe Natureza, de que ela não aguenta mais. Tivemos em junho e julho os meses mais quentes da história. Em agosto, as temperaturas seguem elevadas, resultando em cenas como as que vimos no Havaí e nestes últimos dias aqui do lado de Vancouver. Atendendo a pedido do governo canadense, o presidente Lula determinou o envio de 104 especialistas em combate a incêndios florestais em missão humanitária para o Canadá, que retornaram ao Brasil esta semana após 30 dias de trabalho intenso neste país. Nestes tempos, a solidariedade é um valor que precisará crescer ainda mais nas relações internacionais. Trouxe lá do meu gabinete em Brasília as informações da contagem regressiva, que é o Climate Watch, que conta a cada segundo o tempo que falta até 2030 para conseguirmos achar uma saída contra as mudanças climáticas. O planeta se aproxima de vários pontos de não retorno. Tenho receio de que 2030 seja tarde demais. Precisamos agir e agir logo. E isto é um aspecto central de uma nova governança global. Uma governança que garanta a reorganização de prioridades no planeta, para, dentre outras prioridades, enfrentar e mitigar os impactos das mudanças climáticas. Mas como consegui-la? São várias etapas. Nem todas podem ser abraçadas pelo GEF, mas as iniciativas que saem daqui são fundamentais para todas as demais. Um passo decisivo é o Fundo do Marco Global da Biodiversidade. Pode parecer muito mobilizar 200 bilhões de dólares ao ano, mas nossos maiores gastos serão com os efeitos concretos das mudanças climáticas. Não sei se o governo canadense estimou o quanto se perdeu com os incêndios. Esta conta dos impactos é que deve nos assustar nos nossos países. Não há conta para evitar mais retrocessos. Portanto, um novo aspecto da governança global deve ser aquele que prioriza saídas globais para a preservação da biodiversidade. Ainda sobre o fundo que estamos aprovando nesta Assembleia, Outro passo importante é a definição do critério de alocação de 20% do portfólio em projetos com povos indígenas e comunidades locais. Resultado de emendas apresentadas pelo Brasil, que reflete o reconhecimento cientificamente comprovado do papel dos povos indígenas na conservação e uso sustentável da biodiversidade. Alerto, contudo, que não deve ser um critério apenas aspiracional, mas uma meta concreta e que precisa ser atualizada constantemente. Se estamos falando de saídas globais e da centralidade das diretrizes ambientais, devemos ousar, como países, e voltar a rever a estrutura de governança e decisão dos fóruns multilaterais. Venho aqui resgatar a fala do nosso presidente Lula. Sanar a falta de representatividade é um elemento essencial de uma proposta abrangente e profunda de reforma da governança global que beneficie todos os países em desenvolvimento. E completo dizendo que esta nova governança vai beneficiar a todos os países, inclusive os mais desenvolvidos. Quero destrinchar isto. E, para isto, cito o discurso do nosso presidente a respeito da governança do GEF, proferido por ocasião da Cúpula da Amazônia, realizada em Belém no início deste mês. O presidente Lula disse: Brasil, Colômbia e Equador são obrigados a dividir uma cadeira do Conselho do Fundo. A República do Congo e a República Democrática do Congo são obrigadas a dividir uma cadeira com mais 6 países. A Indonésia é obrigada a dividir uma cadeira com mais 16 países. Enquanto isso, países desenvolvidos como Estados Unidos, Canadá, França, Alemanha, Itália e Suécia ocupam cada um o seu próprio assento. Por que esta divisão é um problema para os países desenvolvidos? Vou trazer problemas reais do Brasil neste momento. Estamos enfrentando no nosso Congresso Nacional setores que querem restringir concretamente, a partir da implementação do marco temporal, a capacidade de avançar nos processos de demarcação e regularização dos territórios indígenas. Todos vocês já perceberam o tamanho de nossos desafios e como as populações indígenas e a biodiversidade são afetadas com a ação do garimpo ilegal. Os problemas reais da preservação da biodiversidade são enfrentados em nossos países, com setores da nossa sociedade. Nós queremos girar nossas políticas públicas para convencer estes setores que estão no caminho errado. Para isto, precisamos assumir mais compromissos internacionais. Porque, se nós somos parte nos processos decisórios, estes setores que impactam a preservação da floresta seguirão com discursos fortes. Assim como os países desenvolvidos precisam ser cobrados para financiar a proteção e promoção da biodiversidade, os países megadiversos precisam ser cobrados em políticas concretas de proteção. Mas, para isto, precisam ser parte do processo decisório. O GEF precisa ousar e mudar sua estrutura de governança para mostrar que o compartilhamento de responsabilidade tem um resultado mais eficiente do que a imposição secular do Norte para o Sul. O financiamento que vem do Norte, fruto da responsabilidade histórica, produzirá melhores resultados quando a governança for compartilhada com os países recebedores, especialmente os megadiversos. Este é o segredo da governança transformadora. novos valores para uma nova e efetiva integração mundial. Expresso aqui a posição do governo brasileiro. Estamos aprovando, em virtude de toda urgência, o Fundo do Marco Global da Biodiversidade, mas sua governança, ao reproduzir a governança do GEF, não é a melhor nem a mais eficiente. A construção do Auxiliary Body não resolve este problema. Que sigamos o processo, mas que sigamos conversando. A Mãe Natureza não espera. Não podemos nos dar o luxo de esperar mais 4 anos para sanar a representatividade inadequada. De igual forma, e aqui continuo falando como representante do Brasil, nosso compromisso com uma nova governança demanda inserir os povos indígenas nos processos de tomada de decisão. Também resgato os dados aqui. Territórios indígenas representam cerca de 22% da superfície global. Superfície esta que abarca 80% da biodiversidade do planeta e próximo de 6% da população mundial. População esta que deve ser a mais afetada pelas mudanças climáticas. Porém, povos indígenas recebem menos de 1% do financiamento climático. Muito disso se deve ao fato de que a governança não reconhece a capacidade dos povos indígenas e comunidades locais de falar sobre seus territórios e levam a políticas que não reconhecem o papel destes atores na preservação da biodiversidade. O Marco Global da Biodiversidade aponta para reverter este processo. Na seção C da decisão 15/4, está escrito sobre as contribuições e direitos dos povos indígenas e comunidades locais. Lá fala que os povos indígenas são guardiões da biodiversidade. Devemos ser parceiros na conservação, restauração e uso sustentável e que, portanto, devem ser incluídos de maneira plena na participação efetiva nas tomadas de decisões. Entendemos que isto vale para cada projeto em particular, mas vale também para os espaços de avaliação e deliberação de projetos. Precisamos de mais representantes indígenas e de comunidades tradicionais também neste espaço, nas novas governanças. A explicação deste ponto está contida no Marco Global. Os próximos projetos precisam ser os mais efetivos possíveis. Com certeza, o avanço da tecnologia, as contribuições científicas e os compromissos políticos dos países serão fundamentais para garantir os objetivos globais de Montreal, tais como para que se mantenha, se aumente ou se restabeleça a integridade, a conectividade e a resiliência de todos os ecossistemas, aumentando sua superfície. Serão fundamentais para que se detenha a extinção induzida pelos seres humanos e para que a abundância das populações seja elevada a níveis saudáveis e resilientes, para que a diversidade genética e o potencial de adaptação das espécies silvestres e domesticadas se mantenham, salvaguardando seu potencial de adaptação. Mas ciência, tecnologia e política não resolvem todos os problemas sem o envolvimento das populações. Porque, se reconhecemos os conhecimentos milenares e tradicionais como decisivos e como os que melhores preservam a biodiversidade, eles precisam estar no centro da formulação dos projetos e da decisão de como implementá-los. De igual forma, o marco também objetiva que os benefícios monetários e não monetários da utilização dos recursos genéticos e dos conhecimentos tradicionais sejam repartidos de forma justa e equitativa, e, em particular, com os povos indígenas e as comunidades locais, contribuindo, assim, para a conservação e utilização sustentável da diversidade biológica. Continuando, a meta 3 diz que é necessário conseguir e tornar possível que, para 2030, ao menos 30% das zonas terrestres de águas continentais e costeiras e marinhas, especialmente as zonas de particular importância para a biodiversidade e as funções e os serviços dos ecossistemas, sejam conservados e manejados eficazmente mediante sistemas de áreas protegidas ecologicamente representativos. E cita os territórios indígenas como fundamentais nesse processo. Os projetos do GEF que melhor produziram resultados no Brasil no tocante a territórios indígenas são aqueles que foram construindo direto com os povos e que resultaram em políticas públicas que estão sendo resgatadas agora por nosso governo. Isto importa muito para nós. Os conhecimentos tradicionais dos povos indígenas e comunidades locais trazem resultados concretos, com representatividade e financiamento mais adequados, serão mais eficientes. São estas as populações as mais interessadas nos projetos eficientes, porque a ausência de projetos gera a morte, além do genocídio Yanomami, produzido pelo governo passado em associação ao garimpo. Também vale ressaltar, com pesar, que no Brasil tivemos 169 assassinatos de defensores ambientais nos últimos 4 anos. 1/3 desses são indígenas. Por isto, a meta 3 fala de demarcação. Sem demarcação das terras indígenas, não há como fazer proteção. Mas, para manejar eficazmente sistemas, é necessários projetos que partam da realidade concreta dos povos, a partir de seus planos de gestão territorial e ambiental. De fato, o efetivo combate aos criminosos que atacam a biodiversidade e os povos só será efetivo quando a proteção do território vier associado às políticas de etnodesenvolvimento das comunidades, integrando a produção indígena e de comunidades locais à cadeia da sociobioeconomia, ao reconhecimento pela proteção da biodiversidade e à promoção e preservação das línguas, a promoção e a proteção da cultura indígena, que reconhecem a prioridade da Mãe Terra, que traz uma nova perspectiva de civilização. E sabemos que, ao fazer isto, estamos dando uma efetiva contribuição ao mundo. Ainda no que diz respeito aos defensores ambientais, vale registrar que, em menos de 5 meses, nosso governo enviou para o Congresso uma importante ferramenta para sua proteção, que havia ficado 5 anos parada no Executivo. O Acordo de Escazú, pioneiro instrumento regional sobre acesso à informação e à justiça, direitos humanos, conservação do meio ambiente e proteção de defensores. Esperamos que o Poder Legislativo ratifique rapidamente o texto. E mesmo enquanto isso não acontece, estamos engajados nos debates no âmbito desse valioso acordo, como ilustrou a presença da ministra do Meio Ambiente e Mudança do Clima, Marina Silva, na COP2, realizada no último mês de abril em Buenos Aires. Em resumo, aos olhos do Brasil, uma governança transformadora, inclusiva e responsável para um planeta sustentável passa, pelo menos, com o compromisso com a preservação da biodiversidade e o enfrentamento às mudanças climáticas na centralidade das políticas globais. Com o aumento do financiamento internacional, incluindo os projetos para povos indígenas e comunidades locais, bem como do compromisso de que os projetos devem visar metas globais, devem entregar resultados globais e de reequilibrar urgentemente o peso entre os países responsáveis pelo financiamento e os responsáveis pela execução dos projetos, para que estes últimos tenham mais capacidade decisória e também de implementação, de maior participação de povos indígenas e comunidades locais, também nas esferas estratégicas da governança, nos espaços de tomada de decisão e gestão dos recursos. Quando interligamos todos estes eixos, estaremos mostrando para o mundo um novo modelo de integração, efetivamente global, pois, como diz o presidente Lula, não é com medidas discriminatórias que vamos promover este novo modelo de integração com foco na preservação. A efetiva integração dos eixos permitirá a integração de parâmetros e metodologias, a harmonização de critérios de alocação de recursos, metas, indicadores e, assim, permite alcançar de forma coordenada, democrática e com justiça aos países e aos povos historicamente afetados todas as metas globais do Marco Global da Biodiversidade. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada, Sonia. Have we fixed that translation yet? The English translation? Is Claude Gascon here? Margarita, have they been able to fix that? What is the issue? I have some questions for Sonia, but before we proceed with Sonia, let's go. We'll address questions to others, and let me know, please, when that is corrected. Yes. They're going to bring the translator out. They're trying to get the translator outside so that we can hear from the translator. But in the interim, until they get the translator out, I'm going to start with some other questions. But someone could please explain this to Sonia, please. Great. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sonia will listen in Spanish, en español. So I would like to have a follow-up question for Sonia, for the minister. And that question is, there is a major event taking place right now in Brazil, the Marco Temporal. I think that everybody would be really interested, since this is a contemporary issue of governance that is a threat to territories of indigenous peoples. Could you give us a kind of a brief update as to where we are with Marco Temporal and the degree of the threat that this poses to the ministry and to indigenous peoples?
Bom, o marco temporal é uma tese que se encontra, né, em julgamento no Supremo Tribunal Federal e delimita o dia 5 de outubro de 1988 para reconhecer territórios indígenas. Sendo os povos indígenas, né, povos originários do Brasil, é impossível, né, que esses territórios sejam reconhecidos como dos povos indígenas somente a partir de 1988, que foi a data da promulgação da Constituição Federal, que é a Carta Magna do Brasil. Então, neste momento, esta tese se encontra para ser retomado o julgamento no Supremo Tribunal Federal, na Suprema Corte, mas também o Congresso Nacional apresentou um projeto de lei com este mesmo conteúdo. Este projeto de lei no Congresso Nacional foi aprovado já na Câmara de Deputados e agora, nesta última quarta-feira, foi já votado na Comissão de Agricultura do Senado Federal. Espera-se que na próxima quarta-feira seja apreciado por uma outra comissão no Senado, que é a Comissão de Constituição e Justiça, né, para que a partir dessa votação vá para o plenário do Senado, né, e ali também haja a votação. Então, é um momento de muita tensão no Brasil, onde tem os indígenas de um lado, né, e se coloca como oposição os produtores, né, o setor do agronegócio, o setor da mineração, né, o setor da indústria madeireira se coloca como oposição de outro lado, né, para juntos, né, negarem esse direito tradicional sobre os territórios dos povos indígenas. É uma preocupação, né, é uma situação considerada grave por nós indígenas, por ambientalistas, né, por todas as pessoas que se colocam como defensoras, né, dos povos indígenas e do meio ambiente. Então, estamos aguardando agora que o Supremo Tribunal Federal possa retomar imediatamente esse julgamento, né, e daí a gente vê qual que será o resultado. O ponto é que o resultado desse julgamento, né, é o que dirá sobre o futuro das demarcações de terras indígenas no Brasil.
Thank you. Obrigado. I want to turn now to Ray Galilo, a young man from Tanzania, who is the African coordinator, the co-coordinator of Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots programs. And Ray, the majority of the world's population is young. Many are worried. Many are marginalized, and they are a force by how they vote, what they consume, what they believe, their understanding of technology. And so if we're talking about changing this system of governance so it's inclusive, young people have to be there and have to be heard and have to have a true voice. Could you kind of talk about what you've been doing and how you see youth becoming an essential part of this movement and of the shift in governance to ensure a healthy planet?
Thank you so much, Peter. So what we've been doing at the Roots and Shoots, basically, has been to really create more compassionate young leaders. And compassion really comes in very strongly, because one of the greatest dangers to our earth is apathy. The state of not caring at all. And so there's real need of genuinely caring. So young people have a role. And before I go into the bit of how this role comes in, it's also very important to recognize that young people are not homogeneous in that sense. So young people are very demographically different. We have different capabilities, we have different aspirations. And so cultivating that really requires addressing this demographic not as, one hat fits all. So young people have a couple of roles. Role number one is we have a role to advocate for sustainable practices. I mean, we are in numbers. And so in that systems change and governance, I mean, we have that bigger role to really play to influence the kind of practice in industry, the kind of practice in how, state actors and non-state actors can actually operate. And the second role, young people have, as active citizens, we have a role to really, make the government and practitioners accountable. And this requires systems in place. One of the great examples that I wish to point out is looking at high-level and global systems, I think sometimes takes youth out of the equation. So what I've actually liked with the SDGs is the whole framework around voluntary local reviews. Then what that brings in the table is that young people on the grassroots can really be there to participate in monitoring and evaluation of actions and on the ground. And also, young people have a role in cultivating technology, and then to look at technology, I mean, technology cannot be subjectively a thing. Technology is a tool. Now, how can we really cultivate and leverage technology to be able to address the issues of governance? I think availability of information is very important, and information that really attests to the young people. Just a few days ago, we had some of my young colleagues, they were like, we didn't know much about the GEF assembly because there was no much information on TikTok. There were more information on much more platforms that really young people don't find much expression in. So the role of young people is really crucial, and I would very much wish to stress on relevance of engaging with the young people and really looking at young people as mutual partners into the whole equation.
Thank you. So I know that you believe that young people should be engaged. How do you do that? I mean, just think about the GEF assembly. Is your voice heard here?
So, well, at least we've had a couple of representations of young people across sessions, which is a very good start. But I think we need more, and we would very much wish to call upon the GEF partners and the Secretariat to consider a deliberate youth advisory panel or a council that really can systematically and meaningfully bring aboard the ideas and understanding and voices of the young people. And this cannot be easy because it has to be from across the globe, it has to be from across regions, it has to be very systematic, it has to be very youth-like. So we would very much look to push the partners of the GEF partners to consider a systematic, comprehensive, and deliberate youth representation and how we can really take accountability into that.
Great, thank you for that. Ruth Spencer is a local community representative in Antigua and Barbuda, and she is basically a strong community activist who does not take no for an answer and insists and ensures that women, gender issues, youth issues, environmental issues are elevated so that the authorities hear and listen. And so, Ruth, could you share kind of examples of how you've done this, and how do we go from an external voice that is knocking on the table to an internal voice that is respected and part of the decision-making process?
thank you for the opportunity to be here sharing with you. The actions start at the local level, where the empowerment of people must take place. No form of implementation of all the GEF projects can take place unless the people are involved. All of us come into contact with people every day in our life, in the supermarkets, in the church, walk in. People approach us. People approach me. They have ideas. They have solutions. They have innovations, but nobody seems to be listening to them. They go to government offices trying to engage a ministry, and what they tell you, they're disrespected. They fear rejection. So they look around for somebody that they can have a conversation with. Somebody who would hear them, hear these ideas that can lead to some community action, because all these ideas, it's issues in their communities and they want to do something about it. Sometimes there's no water. There's a reservoir that can be restored. There's waste in the drains. If those waste and plastic bottles are not removed, when the rain comes, the gutters are filled, there'll be flooding. But what do? I cannot work with one people, so I always advocate. How many people in the community feel like you that want solutions? And sooner or later, I'll get a call or email. Can you come and meet with us? And that's what starts the process, that engagement from idea. But it takes more than that. It leads from ideas. You have to legally help these groups to come together, intellectual property processes, opening a bank account, working with them, developing projects. But since you've been there from the inception, that trust builds up. And today, you wouldn't believe a lot of these projects are sustainable, not just across biodiversity, mercury, chemicals, waste, climate change. And you know, when I go to meetings and talk, you have students in the audience. Can I come and do a PhD research in your country? I want to understand what really happens at the ground level. And I think to date I've hosted about 8 students. They come and they spend 3 months. They want to see how do churches, how do organizations work to build these community-based initiatives. And remember, we have started a lot of them without funding. We do get funds when funds are available from the GEF small grants. That's the only source of dedicated funding in my country and in the Caribbean region for most of the part. But even when the project ends, the activities go on. Voluntary inputs, in-kind support. Sometimes if we could measure that voluntary and in-kind support, it adds up to a lot of monies. That's what these groups bring to the process. So with the big GEF grants, you have local ownership and buy-in when you include the local organizations. You have a source of knowledge, capacity building, and when we come together, things move. It's not going to be no long 4-year cycle. Come with the project ideas, come to the communities, let's consult, let's engage, let's see how we can work together to find these solutions. And then these solutions at the local level now go to make global solutions. And in the process, you build networks, you partner, you build alliances. There's always people in an audience that want to support you. And that's the process. Just open yourself to people. Build that trust. Build that knowledge base, and things will move. Thank you.
And Ruth, do you think that the pace of the changes that your community partners are achieving is keeping up with the pace of the challenges?
One thing I can tell you, once there are challenges, the people rise to the occasion. And when we have ambassadors, visitors to the island coming to visit these little community bases, it gives them that assurance. It encourages them. And I want to give thanks to all the ambassadors who have offices in the Caribbean. They come to visit the government, but no, they want to see what's going on in the community. The Germans have been very supportive, New Zealand, Australia. They see the beekeeping. They come with their suits. They want to go out. You know, they want to be part of the process. And it's these partnerships that work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, to my right is Gretel Aguiar, who is the Acting Director General of the IUCN. And Gretel is Costa Rican, has worked on environmental law, environmental policy, on the rights of indigenous peoples, really thinking about how do you mainstream conservation, how do you mainstream environmental justice, and really sees the IUCN as an umbrella organization that brings together networks and gets people collaborating. In this audience, but across the world, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of non-governmental organizations. Some large, but the vast, vast majority small, local. What's the role that they can play in ensuring that there's inclusivity and diversity in decision-making and influence on governance?
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon to all. First of all, let me say that it's a pleasure for me to chair this table with so many prominent people, and especially women. We all know that the planet is in a crisis, no? That's the first thing that I have to say. And the second thing that we know is that we, humans, we are responsible. So this panel is about governance. We cannot say that things are working. And I think that the civil society and the organizations around the world are doing a fantastic job, but it's not enough. Definitely, we are not there. And organizations are of different types, Peter. We are not all the same. There are local organizations, there are organizations that work at national level, at international level. But we have something in common. And what we have in common is the passion and the commitment and this idea that we can achieve a better planet and a better world. So this is very, very powerful. It's very powerful. We have commitment. Now, we need transformation. That is essential. And I think we already know that. But how that transformation is going to happen is part of why we are here. So as the ministra from Brazil just mentioned, we really need to step up and go ahead. We need recognition of land, territories of indigenous peoples. We need to recognize that there are different types of knowledge, the knowledge of indigenous peoples, the knowledge that we produce, for example, in IUCN. That we need to have access to justice, we need to have inclusive education, we need to have transparency, we need to have clear laws and policies. And there, the NGOs play a big, big role, a huge role. We are not going to take the place of people, communities, and indigenous peoples. We should not do that. We should work hand in hand. We should make alliances. We should partner. We should support. We should mobilize the right knowledge for the right decision taken. And let me say, because I have been hearing during these days, this, really worrying thought that everybody is saying, yes, but civil society need financial resources. And it's correct. Nothing is going to happen without resources. And here I have to say that, that it will be fantastic if the Global Environmental Facility can also allocate resources to civil society. I mean, I understand that this is about governments and engagement with governments, but I think that we live in one planet where we have different ways of working. And civil society is important, communities are important, indigenous peoples are important, and therefore, the mechanism needs to change. It needs to change. I totally agree with the Ministra del Brasil. 20% needs to go to indigenous peoples. If not, we're not going to change this planet. We already proved that it's not working. So I think that for me, Peter, that is important. And organizations like IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, have the power to agglutinate many other organizations and also governments and work together, because only together we will achieve a better planet.
Well, thank you for that. And so I think that what you're saying is part of the responsibility of the multilaterals and the bilaterals and also the nation states. It's to recognize that the solutions to the environmental challenges that we are all collectively facing need to be elevated to the point where resources are going directly to those civil societies that actually are engaged at a community level in addressing a whole range of different issues. And that the efficiency of disbursement of funds will increase. I was actually talking to a dear friend yesterday who happens to be the Secretary General of the GEF, and we were talking about what happens when you take a big tree and you cut it into timber. You basically lose about 30% of the timber. And so how do you get the resources directly to communities is what you're saying, and to NGOs. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct. It's correct, Peter. You know, I truly believe that if we give the resources directly to communities and to indigenous peoples, things will go faster. It's just that we haven't done it enough. And we need to change this. It cannot continue like this. So I truly believe that we will go faster, that we will see great things happening. And you know what? We have no time to lose. This is not the time to say, yes, let's see. No, we have to move and move faster. And I think that this is imperative. I also think that, you know, the discourse of the past where, yeah, I mean, I come from a developing country, but I don't want to hear the discourse of, yes, poor countries, we have to help. No, we can also lead, and we have a lot of knowledge within us. And this is not, please give me, this is let's work together, because it's the only way that this can happen. And you know what? We should not minimize the power of communities, the power of indigenous peoples, the power of civil society, because things are changing. Social media, networking is already changing how we work. Nowadays, communication is very easy among civil society. And we are making this planet change. And I hope, truly hope, that we can work together with government, subnational government, civil society. We need to be together. But we need to recognize that things have changed, and the need to change even faster.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have been really fortunate to hear from the Minister of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, Sonia Guajajara, and we are also really fortunate that we have the Minister of Forestry and Fisheries and Environmental Affairs of the Republic of South Africa here, Barbara Creasy. And Barbara, I have really two questions for you. The first is just, can you comment on something that Sonia said in the beginning, which was that the relationship, that there has to be a different partnership between the dominant funding nations and those nations that are delivering of solutions that are not the dominant funders, that partnership is off balance and it needs to be readjusted. I mean, it makes no sense for 16 nations to have one chair and then other nations that just happen to have the financial resource to each have their own share. And so I'm interested in your response to that as an important leader from an important nation of South Africa. And then I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the question of livelihood and poverty and the challenges and finding solutions for people that are poor, that are dependent upon nature, and how do you actually turn that economy around, and some examples that you might have as to how you blend those together.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Well, I suppose that when we are talking about transformative governance, one of the fundamental issues is how do we ensure that our processes of biodiversity conservation, restoration, and sustainable use bring about a more equitable sharing of benefits to human beings in general. And I think one of the things that we understand is that if we are to analyze inequality and injustice, we would first of all be conscious of the fact that there is an imbalance between the developed countries of the global north and the developing countries of the global south. And in that understanding, we obviously recognize that part of the prosperity of the north has come about as a result of the historical relations with the south and the extraction of wealth in various forms from the south. So, of course, when we look at modern institutions, one of the questions we would want to ask is how does the form of those institutions help us right this balance between the global north and the global south? So I suppose the way in which international bodies are comprised and how power is allocated in those international bodies either assists us or doesn't assist us in tackling the kinds of issues that my counterpart from Brazil was talking about. I think the second issue that you are talking about is how within a particular country or on a particular continent are we bringing about greater inclusiveness and equity. And having listened to other panelists, it seems to me that what we're saying here is that inclusiveness and equity is about resource distribution, but it's also about how we involve people in planning and implementation. So I think that we're not just talking about giving people handouts. We're talking about the fact that people would want to shape the nature of the benefits that they're engaged in and the nature of the benefits that they receive. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to tell you a little anecdote from our own experience in South Africa that indicates how complicated this process of benefit sharing is. Many of you here would have heard about our major national park, the Kruger National Park, which is a huge conservation area that has almost 3 million people living on its western boundary. And so the question of how we ensure communities benefit from what goes on in the Kruger Park is something that has given us immense amount of thought and immense amount of implementation. And we have got public works programs, we've got programs that involve youth, we've got supplier development programs, we've got programs to involve historically dispossessed land owners in the Kruger Park in the direct tourism benefits. So we think that we're doing fairly well. And a couple of years ago, we had an incident where communities for several months blocked one of the major access roads into the park and wouldn't allow tourists in or out. And during that time, as minister, I received a number of telephone calls from both those involved in the conservation in Kruger and also those involved in private conservation areas bordering Kruger. And the subject of those telephone calls was, why doesn't the community understand that by doing this, they are undermining the benefit they receive from the park? And so, of course, there were meetings that were facilitated with the communities and discussions about this particular issue. And what was very interesting that emerged in the course of those discussions was that these protests had nothing to do with the way in which the community were benefiting from the Kruger. In fact, the community went as far as saying, yes, you're doing fine. We like what you're doing, it's fine. But the fundamental issue that those communities were facing is that they were not receiving water and sanitation from the municipality. And so the Kruger officials were saying to them, but that's got nothing to do with us. We don't provide water and sanitation. And the community was saying, well, in that case, your road won't get opened. So what are the learnings from that? And I think that obviously the first and important learning is the way in which we do community participation and the way in which we identify what communities regard as benefits can't just be a tick box exercise where we are determining the benefits and the communities are passive recipients. The second issue is that I think that very often the reason why, in my own experience, the reason why community problems don't get solved is because often the people that are involved directly in those negotiations are not senior enough to be able to bring about the change that is required. So those community representatives from Kruger could only talk about, well, do you want to get another percentage from the restaurants in the Kruger? They couldn't talk about, let's fix the sanitation problem. And only a more senior person who would have access to another department could be able to do that. But I suppose that this issue raises two other questions. And those questions relate to the fact that I think it's naive to think that in situations of developing countries, protected areas can provide benefit sharing and sustainable use for everybody who would be living on the outskirts. And not all of these problems have a solution that is within the sphere of biodiversity and conservation. And lastly, I would want to say that, and I'm in a sense, I think, opening the door for the next speaker, that the solutions to those problems don't necessarily lie within biodiversity and conservation, but lie within the question of the way in which we understand the value of ecosystem services and how we reward and how we structure economies and value production in societies. Let me leave it there.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. You know, as I turn to my good friend, Dr. Naoko Ishii, who was the GEF Secretary General for 8 years, who has been thinking about governance and expressing frustration over the limits of solutions and the need for transformation. She brings a perspective that is obviously connected to community activism and is fully supportive of that, but is more of a global perspective in terms of how do you change a system. And what Barbara has just talked about is clearly that protected areas in and of themselves offer some benefits, but what happens outside of them and the sustainability issues of how you take care of the earth, generate economic development outside of those specific places is really at the heart of finding solutions. So Naoko, can you touch upon the vision that you have?
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thank you so much also for the GF to bring me back to this community. So nice to be here with you. As Peter just mentioned, that when I see this, for instance, these protected areas, that we have a quite good success in terms of protection in that protected areas, but all bad things are happening outside the protected areas. So that is one of the challenges. So during my 8 years at the GEF, I have been seeing that, and I have been actually thinking of what is the best governing mechanism to safeguard the global commons. And in my terminology, it's a stable, resilient planetary system. Then throughout our experience and with GEF and beyond GEF, I can say one thing, that in a good chance, we have a higher chance of success if we have a good community as a governing body for project. So that it's kind of also the very well economically the evidence through Elinor Ostrom that if we have a trusted community with who share the interest, the long term, not the short term, but the long term interest, and to have a kind of rule, the authority to govern themselves, that you have a much higher chance of the success. And I also see a kind of good example like in a water community, either through river basin, that watershed management or the catchment, if you are able to bring all diverse stakeholders together at the decision-making table, because water has a quite diverse value of being, say, the agricultural value, industry value, day-to-day life value, but also the value for nature. If you are able to bring all diverse stakeholders together at the decision-making table, how to value the water and how to govern the water, you definitely have a much higher chance of success. The challenge comes in when we actually go beyond those and the governance, the community governance. And if we try to address that a global challenge, you need also the global system response. And that's where I think the challenge comes in, because that our day-to-day decision of the citizen or the consumer, the investor, is very much subject to the current economic and financial system, which has two problems, that which doesn't really reflect the true value of natural capital. That's why that we continue to destroy the natural capital. But the second problem is it really doesn't appreciate either the societal human capital. So we continue to increase the disparity or inequality in the globe. So with those two problems of the current economic and financial system, how can we really change that or address the global system? And that's why I'm quite keen in how we can really align those economic and financial system with our true value system. Let me maybe explain with a much more concrete example of Japan. Japanese does import more than 60% of the food from abroad. And through that importation of the food, we actually destroy a lot of rainforest. We pollute a lot of soil. We put a lot of stress on water. Then we actually are part of this program of biodiversity loss and climate change. But being just a citizen or being just a consumer, how we can really change it? We really need to find a way to make the metrics of economics and finance aligned with our true value system. Some good news is that the youth or consumers or even investors are kind of waking up. You see that a good result of the COP15, CBD COP15 in Montreal. We were so close to make that disclosure of that the impact of the dependency of the nature mandatory. That I believe that it will come sometime soon. And who are behind this pressure? It's a consumer and the investor and the youth to really make a sound, that a noise or the pressure to bring those system change so that the finance will flow into the right decision point. So I continue to encourage that the people, being the citizens, the consumer, the investor, and the youth, to find the leverage point of the system change so that our financial and economic system aligned with our true value system, the value system of the natural capital, value system of the society, and the people. And it leads to my last point, I guess, that another great example, the success of the CBD COP15 is an agreement of 30 by 30. That so by 2030, that 30% of the land and the sea will be protected. But the question is, who is paying for that? Of course, we expect that the government may pay for that, but may not be good enough. But if we were able to change the metrics of finance and the economic system, we consumers, as citizens, are part of this mechanism so that through our day-to-day decision of what do we eat tonight, what we commute to my workplace, that you can actually pay that reward to those who are guardian of the planetary system or the guardian of the global commons, that through actually rewarding that their effort to safeguard the land and the water and the forest and those global commons. To me, that is a very natural way of rewarding that those guardians' effort, and it's actually very also the natural way to lead the 30 by 30 agreement. Thank you, Peter.
Noko, thank you so much for that. We're going to go through one quick lightning round right now, 1 minute apiece. And the question is, what do you want to see changed in the GEF so that the GEF can effectively respond to the crises that we're all addressing and concerned about? And Ray, I'm starting with you.
Thank you so much, Peter. So, would wish to see 3 things. One is calling upon the GEF partners on concrete planning strategy of youth engagement in this whole equation. Because obviously we're seeing that youth are one thing and the crisis we're facing is the other thing. So having a concrete strategy at country level, at community level, on how to engage young people at grassroots to respond to the whole aspect of the GEF mandate and the frameworks that we work on. That's number one. Number 2, at GEF level, designate finance for youth. Because if youth are the majority citizens, and then they even struggle to really access finance to really do impact on the ground, deliberately that we're missing out the potential of the young people. So we wish to stress on how do we increase more accessibility to youth, whether through CSOs or otherwise. And the third aspect would be to have a support mechanism that actually understands the way of the youth. It has to be patient, not loose, just patient. And to close on that, it's also important that as we are telling young people to do this, to do that, I think that won't work. We'd really want to see vivid actions and examples. It's like teaching a kid to read a book while a parent would be maybe probably enjoying Netflix. It won't work. So we would really want to learn it from the countries, the commitments that you put, that when you tell young people to really do certain course of action, so it has to start with you, and then the young people really will follow on course. I thank you.
Thank you so much.
Naoko.
For GF?
For GEF, 1 minute lightning round.
Okay, two things. I think that the global challenge we are facing needs a global systemic solution. So two things that now we want to continue to, well, I want Jeff to continue to explore how best you can come up with a governing mechanism through your project and program so that we can actually that include all the voices that who can represent their own value to the decision-making system. So that's one. But together, doing this project and program, you also please look at how you can change, influence the global system, particularly for the finance and economic system, so that you can align those systems with your true value system. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara.
First of all, I want to support the previous speaker in the importance of an overall reform of the global financial system, because the needs that developing countries are facing in the context of climate change and biodiversity loss are far greater than the GEF can ever meet. And I think that was linked to my second point, which is that while one appreciates the GEF projects, in order to have impact and scale, there needs to be a linkage to broader sources of finance over a more systematic period of time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I will say that effective, just, and equitable governance system where more voices can be included, resources to civil society, indigenous peoples, direct allocations, and more funds to the new biodiversity fund.
Thank you. And Ruth?
I would like to see the GEF return to the 1992 mandate at the Rio Summit, where it said environmental issues are cross-cutting, cannot be solved by governments alone. So you need the inputs of CSO and the public. Out of that mechanism came Principle 10, called the Escazú Agreement, and the principles of the Escazú Agreement should be mandated in every project that the GEF invests in. And the small grants facility needs to be strengthened. That's the only mechanism reaching the people in our communities. It needs more funding so that all these little pilots can be upscaled to meet the needs of the various conventions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Sonia?
Bom, uma alegria para mim estar aqui nesta mesa com diferentes pessoas de diferentes lugares do mundo, né? E quero terminar dizendo que os compromissos são importantes, né? Mas mais que compromissos ou acordos, é a gente agora definir esses mecanismos concretos de implementação de políticas locais. né? E se 82% da biodiversidade do planeta está sob a guarda dos povos indígenas no mundo, é urgente proteger os direitos desses povos. Né? Se os direitos dos povos indígenas no mundo, os modos de vida estão ameaçados, toda essa biodiversidade está ameaçada. Se essa biodiversidade está ameaçada, portanto, a humanidade inteira está em risco. Então, termino aqui com este convite, né, a este reconhecimento, né, do papel que os povos indígenas, comunidades locais e território dos povos indígenas exercem para todo o planeta. E o GEF é um importante mecanismo para apoiar estes povos e estes territórios. Muito obrigada.
Thank you. And as the leader or the person organizing this plenary, first of all, I want to thank all of the participants for their wisdom, their journeys, their sharing of this time with each of us, and also as clearly the elder amongst this gathering. I've been radicalized, and my suggestion to the GEF is actually that they consider a shift in the power structure. And the shift in the power structure is not to have indigenous peoples, marginalized communities, and youth as advisors, but actually put them on the decision-making body so that they are present there, so the choices that are made actually include their wisdom, and we give up some of the power to those people who are actually affected. And on that, I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and this session is over. Thank you.